In this workbook called Do Loops, we've got a worksheet called Short Lists. It's got 42 rows. If you saw the previous movie, you saw a technique for recording a process and creating a macro that made the first 3 rows bold, next 3 italic, next 3 bold, and so on and so on. That was done using what's called a for loop. And as we press Alt F11 to go into Visual Basic, we're likely to see this. If you don't see this right away, be sure you check over on the left-hand side in the VBA project window, the modules that appear under Do Loops. Expand the modules if necessary, double-click Module 1. That's the code we want to see. It's named bold italic, and it simply moves through the data 7 times. Because we have 42 rows, we're doing these in clusters of 6 rows, 2 times 3 here. Now, the for loop is a powerful tool, but on the other hand, it's not flexible. And you want to be aware of an alternate structure, and a structure that's probably used more commonly in Excel macros. It's called a do loop, and it comes in 2 basic forms. We'd like to be able to perform this kind of an action many, many times. And let's say that the lists that we work with might vary. So as we jump back into Excel with Alt F11, imagine this list here coming to us in a variety of different ways. The current list on October here is quite large. If I click on a cell here and double click the bottom edge, goes down to row 2400 here. Now, let's imagine that we get this list every month from Colorado. This is the list here, but we get them from other states as well. And they're not always going to have the same number of rows. And it's going to be widely different between different states. And let's say we want to use that macro on any of these. That for loop construction just is not going to work. So let's adjust this macro that we already have seen here, Alt F11. Let's adjust this and change it so that it can work for any number of rows. Now what we're doing here isn't really that important. We're simply applying a formatting feature, bold and then italic. But instead of this structure, let's put in the word do. Now, the word do is not followed by a noun, so it sometimes strikes you as a little bit awkward. We can do this in a couple of different ways. There are 2 major uses of this. One is to use the word while. Now, we want to do these actions, so to speak, or perform these actions while what condition is true. You wouldn't know exactly what to type here unless you've seen an example. So let's say for a lot of you, this is the first time you will have seen this word, 2 words together actually, active cell. Now when you're typing this, type it in lowercase. As we complete this or click on another line, the A and the C in here will become capitalized automatically. With certain keywords that will happen automatically in Excel. Do while the active cell, what is it we're looking for? We want to do this while the active cell has data in it. In other words, if we're about to start a process that moves us down a list on a worksheet, we want to keep doing this as long as the active cell has data in it. Or phrased a different way, we want to do this while the active cell is not blank. And we can say not equal to using the left arrow and the right arrow. But how do we indicate blank? Double quote, double quote. Now, these are called do loops because they end with the word loop, not the next counter that we saw with for. So I'm going to highlight this and simply put in the word loop. And by the way, you might have noticed already that the text that I had typed up above, the do and the while turned blue, and in active cell, the A and the C became capitalized. Same thing will happen with loop as I click below it. See what's happening. So if we use this structure, this is going to work indefinitely. Let's test this out. Let's resize our screen here, upper right-hand corner. Let's make this be visible. And let's try this on October list. This is a list that goes way down. We don't necessarily have to see it all. Here too, resize the screen, make it roughly half as big so we can watch this play out. Now we could test it with just a few cells. Let's click within the data. And in order to see the worksheet a little better, let's simply collapse the ribbon menu system. Double click the current tab is one way to do it. We can also press Control F1. So I've got the active cell here. Let's step into the macro up above. Use the step mode creation here by way of the debug command in this VBA menu here. Debug step into. I'm going to start pressing F8 now. We're going to jump to B1, highlight 3 cells. The active cell is not empty. Let's make this bold. Down 3, make that italic. I'm pressing F8 a little more rapidly here. Now, as we see this and it begins to work, this is going to take us a long, long time to go through 2,400 rows. So sometimes when you're testing a macro like this, going through step mode, if you see that it's working and you have confidence in it, you don't necessarily know if it's going to end just yet. Let's check it out here. Let's go back to the run command in the menu and choose continue with F5. Now, I could have pressed F5 as well. This is going to zip through all of our data, we hope. There it is, down through 2,400 rows, and there it is. Now, if there were 2,300 rows or 2,700 rows or 10,000 rows, this, we assume, is going to work accurately. But there is a different way of constructing this, and it could be better. You can use do while, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to leave that there, but as a reminder, I'm going to put a single quote in front of it. That immediately makes it a comment. I'm going to press enter a couple of times. The alternate construction that you might want to consider using here is do until. And you just can't come along and make up words, but this is valid. And in a certain sense, it's the opposite of what we used with do while. We want to do these actions or perform these actions until the active cell equal double quote, double quote. Now that's a little more direct, and I think for a lot of people better. But there's another way too, just as well. Now this will work exactly the same way as the previous structure. I think for many people, this is easier to read and to absorb than the previous construction. But there's a third way that perhaps is even better. And I'll leave that other one there too. Put a single quote in front of it for the moment to turn it into a comment. Do until, and you certainly wouldn't know this unless you've seen an example of it. I'm going to type is empty, left parenthesis, and then active cell, right parenthesis, and we don't need anything else. Just click here. Keywords become capitalized. That's, I think, the clearest of the three, and this will work. And I'll test this one out. Again, going back to the October sheet here. This time we'll go full screen. First, click column B. Double-click home to bring back the text there. Make everything unbold, unitalic. There we go. We don't necessarily need to go to the top, but perhaps to watch it a little bit. Click there. Anywhere. Let's run this macro. Developer tab. Macros in this workbook. It's called bold italic, but we made a change to it. It's now got a do loop in it. We'll run it. And there it is, all done. Alt F11, back to the code. We've changed this. It was a for loop before. You don't need these anymore eventually, of course. We get rid of those. That's an example of a do loop, a common construction there. And I think easier to use and certainly more flexible than the for loop that we saw in the previous movie. And so the do loop, this is a powerful tool. It's ideally used when we're trying to move through a set of data and the actions are repetitious.